We're all interested in different aspects of this time period, and that just adds a richness to what we're doing. So I'm hoping that local historians can just comment and share their interests and their questions. So this is not a formal presentation. It's not as if we all know what happened. So it's kind of an exploratory discussion. So my goal for the Historical Society is to gather information that will inform an exhibition next summer at the Handy House. Okay, so that's my goal. And I know other people have other goals. I want to mention that this project is co-sponsored by the Dartmouth Historical and Arts Society, and without them we wouldn't be able to do this project. And there is one person that I need to mention and who is not with us, that is Bob Harding. Thank you, Bob, for digitizing the town meeting records, putting them on the website. That is how we know that they existed and how I have been able to access them. So Bob is very much with us this morning. So let's see, the plan for today is I'm going to make some introductory comments, then I'm going to hand over to Richard, and I have asked Richard to prepare some comments because he is someone who has really dug into the town meeting records. And then we'll sort of pass the mic over to some other local historians, and then we'll open it up to general discussion. And then at a certain point, I will then talk about the process of transcribing the records and the good news, bad news. I'm going to share some good news, bad news with you, but it's mostly good news. Okay. So probably like many of you, I've been watching the Ken Burns American Revolution series, and I've been learning a lot. I'm wondering whether you also feel you've been learning new things from that.
Yes.
Yeah, definitely. And so I've been connecting a lot of the themes that I have learned about in that series to our story here in Westport and Dartmouth. So I'm wondering, what was happening here in our own community? What was the town of Dartmouth at that time? And whenever I'm saying Dartmouth, I'm also meaning Westport. So Dartmouth is Westport, Dartmouth as we know it today, New Bedford, Fairhaven, and Acushnet. Some of you know, I'm sure many of you know that. So when we're referring to Dartmouth, we're referring to Westport as well. So as I look at this story, what I find are some stories that have been handed down through the generations that have no particular source. For example, there's the story of the militia soldiers stopping by Bread and Cheese Brook, stopping to have a bite to eat, some bread and some cheese, and supposedly that is how Bread and Cheese Brook got its name. I'm not sure where that story comes from. Another story that is handed down is Lafayette's soldiers coming down Old County Road, walking down the hill, stopping off at a house at the head of Westport for a bite to eat. And that's quite a story that's described in considerable detail. Again, I've no idea where that comes from, but I always feel there's a kernel of truth in some of these stories. And another story is that of Abner Brownell. He is Westport's Paul Revere, galloping around Westport to warn everyone. Where do these stories come from? But if they are repeated enough, they become history. Okay. So even more important to return to the original documents, to the town meeting records, and the project is called In Our Own Words. So we need to examine what was being said in this town, what was the debate. So I think there's a huge value in doing this word-by-word transcribing. I am interested in how decisions were made by the town. I'm interested in, and this is our particular story, how the Quakers responded to the call to arms, and how were the Quakers perceived by the rest of the community, knowing that Quakers, of course, are pacifists and neutral. Some of them, most of them were neutral, but not all. You know, what was that dynamic like in the town? And I do believe the town records can reveal some of that. Why did Westport break up with Dartmouth in 1787? What was going on? And Dartmouth broke up into all of its little pieces. But you know, during that era, is that connected to the war and what was going on in this community? Why did Dartmouth vote against ratifying the Constitution while Westport voted in support of the Constitution? That's a question that I have. And how did the religious divisions, which hopefully Richard will talk a little bit more about, the religious divisions that are very apparent geographically, Westport, Dartmouth being dominated by Quakers, New Bedford, Fairhaven, Congregationalists, how did that play out in all of this? So as I understand it, during the Revolution, every town had to make a decision and every individual had to make a decision. And so we're looking at this from a very micro, small scale level, but it informs the wider issue of the war. And it's not as if no one has looked at the town meeting records. We do have, of course, the work of Henry Worth. Henry Worth was a historian that we all look to. He did his work in the early 1900s. Henry Worth did look very carefully at the town meeting records, and he did write about it, and again, Richard will talk probably a little bit about that. But I'll give you a brief history of the town records themselves. Okay, so in 1888, and this is courtesy Bob Harding, 1888, the city of New Bedford formed a committee to investigate the condition of the town meeting records. These were the physical records. And they found the records, I guess in the Dartmouth Town Hall, in an iron safe. And they found that the records were in very poor condition. And these were two large books bound in rawhide. Imagine that. They probably still exist, I suppose, of 400 pages each. The years 1776 to 1779 were lost, so we don't have those years, unfortunately. Okay, so in 1888, this group recommended that the records should be copied. And this is the handwriting that you will see when you look at the town meeting records. It's the handwriting of Etta Martin. Okay, so she copied them, I guess, soon after 1888, I suppose.
What was her name?
Etta Martin. So this is her lovely handwriting, easy to read. And she did a great job. And until 1969, her transcriptions were only available in the New Bedford City Hall. In 1969, the records were microfilmed by the Mormon Church. 1969, so converted to microfilm. But it wasn't until 2014 that Bob Harding found them, and it was Bob who got the microfilm digitized. That's right, yes. And it was Bob who then got them uploaded to the Dartmouth Historical and Arts Society website. And that's how we all became aware of them, I believe. So, and so currently they are as PDFs on the Dartmouth Historical and Arts Society. So I will stop there. I do have more information that I'll give to you at the end of this about how the interface that we are using to transcribe these records, how that works and where we are with the project. So at this point, I'm going to hand the mic over to Richard.
Good morning. As Jenny hinted at, I think the thing that makes Dartmouth...
Richard, could you put the phone up so for the
Close to your
microphone
okay.
so we can hear you?
The thing that makes Dartmouth distinctive compared to the experiences of other communities is its preponderance of Quakers. Henry Worth estimated that at the time of the Revolution, there was probably between 60 and 70% of the population was Quaker, with a smaller group being Congregationalist and a yet smaller group being Baptist. They were not evenly distributed throughout Old Dartmouth. The one Congregational church was located in Acushnet, and the Congregationalists tended to be from Acushnet and Fairhaven and from kind of the north end of New Bedford, which back at that time was very thinly settled. The south end of New Bedford, all of Dartmouth was solidly Quaker. When you get to Westport, it's again mostly Quaker. The exceptions being there's some people out in the far western end of town, like along Sodom Road, maybe up into like Sanford Road, who attended what's now Holstone Baptist Church in Adamsville, and a few Congregationalists, particularly from the Coaxed section of Westport, and a few at Westport Point, like the Coreys, who attended the Congregational Church at Little Compton. Being predominantly Quaker was unusual in Massachusetts for any town. Probably Dartmouth, Rochester, Sandwich, Nantucket, and Swansea would be the only towns that had a really significant Quaker population. And this presented some problems for the town during the Revolution. Each town was required to maintain by what they call the Committee of Safety in Boston, which essentially is the state government, required to have certain numbers of militia members based on their population. And because the Quakers, you were automatically dismissed if you were a Quaker and you participated in a militia. Never mind actually go out and fight somewhere, but just to drill, that was an automatic disowning, a dismissal. You were kicked out. So that was out for the Quakers. But since the total population was the number on which the militia quota was based, the town had to, they could pay a fine if they went under, they underperformed, but the fines were enormous. And what they did in practice was actually to get militia members from outside of Dartmouth. They brought in some, ringers by paying big bounties. We know a whole company of militia in Dartmouth the captain was a guy named Amasa Soper, who wasn't even from Dartmouth. He was from Freetown. But Freetown, with its predominantly Congregationalist population, probably the remainder of that whole company came from Freetown as well. But that cost a lot of cash, and that cash to get them to sign up for bounties. And that cash came ultimately from the taxpayers of Dartmouth. And this is one of the reasons why, after the Revolution, when the breakup comes in 1787, it is, according to Henry Worth, and I think there's some merit to this point of view, that there's a lingering resentment of the eastern part of town, the part of town that was predominantly Congregational, specifically Fairhaven and Acushnet, against the remainder, in the sense that the predominantly Quaker part didn't really pull their weight, and it didn't provide militia enlistments that caused their tax bills to go up. And aside from that, there were other factors as well, the Quakers. The Quakers were as Jenny mentioned, officially, and this came from Quaker doctrine, they had to be neutral. They were not allowed to say, we're on the Patriots side, we're on the loyal side. They were neutral. Now, some of them in real life weren't. We know of a couple that weren't. But they would get in trouble. They would get in trouble with the meeting if they came down on one side or the other. But obviously, the non-Quaker members who were patriots of this town would have looked very suspiciously on the Quakers and say, "Oh, well, they say they're neutral, but you know, why won't they just say they're on our side, on the revolutionary side?" So that also leads to some dissent and division in Dartmouth. And another thing that the Quakers had, along with that neutrality, they had a belief that they should be able to keep on trading with the British or with anybody as if nothing had happened. They were above the war. The war was the Quaker phrase, they would call it of the world. The world, they meant the non-Quaker world. And whatever was going on in terms of revolution was outside of the Quaker rule. And so they should be allowed to trade with anybody. And there were some efforts, mostly involved members of the Slocum family, who was a Quaker family, and involved taking sheep. Remember, the British were occupying Newport at the time. They had about 5,000 troops there to feed, and it was a problem to get them fed. And they would take mostly sheep and other cattle, these local Quakers, and put them out on Cuttyhunk and Nashawina, which were owned by the Slocum family. And they would leave them out there. All of a sudden, all the cattle were gone, all the sheep were gone. And they actually, some people actually saw the British ships come and take them away and restock them again, you know, just days later. Well, they're not foolish enough to just keep putting cattle out there just to be taken off. So the Committee of Safety got very suspicious, and the selectmen got very suspicious, and they said, well, what's going on here? There's a quid pro quo going on here. Somehow they're getting paid in order to go out and leave these cattle on the islands, and which provided fresh meat for the 5,000 or so British and Hessian soldiers who were located at Newport, who otherwise could only be supplied. All supply for Newport would have come through Halifax, and to get fresh meat there in the ships of the day, non-refrigerated ships, was just something that was impossible. So it was a real problem. And generally, even when they were in New York and Charleston, which were about the only other places the British held for a significant amount of time during the war, it was always a problem to get things like firewood, fresh food, because they had to go into the hinterland to do that. And it's probably one of the reasons behind when the British eventually evacuated Newport. So the biggest single issue, I think, that divides Dartmouth is that religious issue between the Quaker and the Congregationalists. So that's something to keep an eye on. Traditionally, you know, you're talking in more general terms about a revolution. In a way, the revolution is not the first insurrection to happen in Massachusetts. Back in 1689, I believe it was, there was a royal governor, Sir Edmund Andros, who was governor not just of Massachusetts, but of all they called the United Colonies. It was all of the New England states, plus New York, plus New Jersey. And this was an effort by the later Stuart Kings to start to gain control over the colonies. The colonies were kind of grown wild. At first, you know, from 1620, the first generations, what England's policy really was is just get settlers over there. Don't worry about anything else, because they're competing against the French in French Canada and the Dutch, who are in New Amsterdam, New York, and whose claims go as far east as the Connecticut River, and also include Martha's Vineyard in Nantucket. So the idea was to just get boots on the ground, get settlers on the ground over here, and everything else can take a back seat. And by the end of the 1600s, well, maybe there's maybe we need to take more control over these colonies. But they did have the insurrection against Edmund Andros that coincided with what they call the Glorious Revolution in England. Another factor I should mention that both leads to a lot of emigration from England to the colonies, and which keeps the British government occupied, is the English Revolution, which is going on full-scale warfare in the 1640s and 50s, but then continues in a lot of political turbulence that goes all the way up to 1689 and the Glorious Revolution, when James II is forced out and William of Orange comes in, along with William and Mary will come. So, in William and Mary, in the House of Orange is willing to pursue, again, a more kind of hands-off policy towards the colonies. And not things like taxation and things like that. They just didn't worry about. Again, they just wanted to forestall French and Dutch incursion, which they did quite successfully. The Dutch, who were kicked out of New York, and held off the French in Canada. Then we get to the 7 Years' War, which is usually called here the French and Indian War. And there was a royal governor of Massachusetts named William Shirley. He was not elected, he was appointed by Britain. And, but he is also the commander-in-chief of all British military forces in North America for most of that war. And he's a man with no military experience. And he gets enormous amounts of money coming over from London to Massachusetts, which is supposed to be used to fund military efforts against the French, but it's actually used for political payoffs. It's just general graft, which is eventually found out. And Shirley is recalled to London, and Massachusetts gains a good measure of its prosperity in the 1750s and 60s because of that. But he's recalled to London, and he's dumped, and they put a professional military men, first Lord Loudon and then Lord Amherst, are put in charge of the British forces in North America. But one of the consequences of that, of the recall of Shirley, is that the young king at the time, who had just taken the throne, was King George III. And he was a man who looked closely after his, not only his household accounts, but after the accounts of his country. And he didn't like the idea of getting ripped off. And George III, I think from that moment, became, they have too much power over in the colonies. They're doing things, they're ripping us off, and this ain't gonna happen again. And that starts, I think, in motion things like this later, the Stamp Act, the Townsend Act, and things like that, that leads to this kind of taxation crisis. So it doesn't just spring up suddenly, but it's kind of a consequence of really many decades, even a century and a half, of kind of push and pull between London wanting to exert more authority over the colonies, and the colonies almost uniformly wanting to have less authority and more self-governance. And it goes back, in Massachusetts particularly, goes back a long time, even though Massachusetts does, right up until the time of the Revolution. They have a governor who is an appointee of London, of the English. He's not elected. Rhode Island always has elected governors, right up until the time of the Revolution. So this conflict, and usually the conflict that Dartmouth had was not with London. It wasn't with the royal house. It was usually with Boston. And it was mainly, again, another Quaker issue. This idea of the minister tax. And in those days, the state of Massachusetts and the colony of Massachusetts, before that, had a statute which required the salaries of congregational ministers to be paid. It had an established state religion and a taxpayer-funded one. And there were selectmen of Dartmouth who refused to collect that tax, who were in prison. One of them died in prison. And that was a huge, for many decades, a real bone of contention. That law, by the way, remained in effect in Massachusetts until I believe it was 1842. And I said, well, wait a minute, what about the US Constitution? The First Amendment prohibits the establishment of religion. Yes, it does, but remember, the First Amendment only applies to the federal government until the 14th Amendment is passed, which is, I believe, 1867. So, and it was not an issue. Many states, not just Massachusetts, had established state religions, but Massachusetts was the last state to do away with an established state religion. So a lot of these, both issues during the Revolution, after and before the Revolution, have an awful lot to do with religion. But one more that actually does it, I'll throw in, when I talked about the prior insurrection against Governor Edmund Andros, his biggest sin, remember he's ruling here from Boston, is allowing an Anglican church to be established in Boston. Anglican church, that's the official, and remains the official state church of Great Britain. What's wrong with that? Not in Puritan Boston. They didn't want anything to do with the Anglicans, and that was really the precipitating factor that led to his problem. So there is a history of conflict that goes on, but nobody, even in it was sort of an insurrection, but don't get the wrong idea. Nobody in 1689 was thinking about independence for the colonies. That was never mentioned. That was off the table. They just wanted to get rid of that particular governor.
Okay. That was a great history lesson. Yes.
May I ask a question? This is being videotaped.
Yes.
So are we going to be able to get access to this?
Yes, I will talk with the town and make sure.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm going to keep an eye on the clock, but I wanted just to give some of the local historians a chance just to talk very briefly about what are your interests, what are you hoping to discover during this project. So can we start with Diane?
Sure. I've been waiting for this moment for a long time. The nonprofit that we manage is the Dartmouth Heritage Preservation Trust, and we are the stewards of the 1762 Aiken House, and we've been at it for over 20 years. And with the Aiken descendants and developing a relationship with them, which I have done for many years, I have, excuse me, I have access to a lot of the Aiken family history, going back to when they came over from Aberdeen, Scotland, and then went to the Newport area, and then settled in Dartmouth. So I've been studying the Aikens for a long time, and I have access to their family trees that were done by their ancestors. So we form quite a nice group of ancestors, plus myself and others, to really learn all we can about the Aikens. So fast forward to this project, I will say that the Aiken House, built in 1762 by British subjects, of course, is also a witness site to the Revolution, because there aren't that many of those left around, especially an intact Georgian Cape style house.
Diane, can you
Sure.
explain what you mean by a witness site?
Oh, yes. Sure. A witness site to the Revolution. So that people in Massachusetts and other, obviously, colonies still have these sites that are extant, that witnessed the Revolution and the activities that went on. And that's particularly true of the Aiken family, because the Aikens were shipbuilders, and they ran a tavern in what is now Peyton Village, which was known as Aiken's War, or Aiken's Landing, after the Aikens lost everything during the British raid in September of 1778. So my goal is to work towards events related to September of 1778. Hopefully I'll still be here to work on this, and that will also include the other communities that make up Old Dartmouth. So we're part of a group that the group is working on a bunch of other things which you'll learn about here, a little bit in the immediate future, like next year, but my focus has been on that. And in developing a relationship, and I encourage you to look him up, Jonathan Lane, some of you know him, who's the executive director of Revolution 250. Find the website, I share it every chance I get. It's chock full of information about the revolution, leading up to the revolution, and all of these milestone events that they're working on, such as now commemorating the Henry Knox Trail, which started over the weekend because Jonathan was up in Ticonderoga in the cold talking about Henry Knox and the fact that he brought all of this hardware. I'm losing the name of the
Cannons.
Thank you.
How many cannons are going to be reenacted to be brought to Dorchester Heights?
Well, I don't know. We'll have to learn more from Jonathan about that. So, I mean, that's going on now, leading up to next year, Evacuation Day. But getting back to the Aikens, so maybe they were Quakers. You know, some people who are ancestors of, who are descendants rather, of the Aikens talk about their Quaker lineage, but then it's not that clear, really, because LU, the namesake of the house that we manage on the corner of Dartmouth and Rockland Street, and his brother James ran that shipbuilding business and the tavern, and you know they had a huge family that were entrepreneurial. But when they banished the Loyalists, which were still in Dartmouth Village, those Loyalists wanted to get their revenge, and of course the British were only too happy to collaborate with them because they needed to know how to get to the Apponeoganset River because they were busy also destroying Bedford Village and other parts of Old Dartmouth. So I'm thrilled about all of this because it allows me to dig even deeper into the Aiken family. So I'm deep into the Aikens, but I want to learn more about their role during the Revolution, especially Benjamin Aiken, because he's mentioned a lot. Because in these transcripts, or in the town meeting minutes, because he was a justice of the peace, and he was a town clerk, just like his father John Aiken was. And by the way, John Aiken was one of those selectmen who did not want to pay the minister's tax, so he was jailed, but he survived until about maybe 1743. I didn't bring all my genealogy info. He was born in 1663. So they had a pedigree, these people, of resistance. But with Benjamin, he was out there, the Committee of Safety. He was part of state, the state legislatures at the time. And he was Elihu's older brother. And so my hope is to just learn more about Benjamin in particular, because I can guarantee you that, and he outlived Elihu, because Elihu died in 1790 in the Aiken house that we manage, because he was obviously, after the British destroyed Paignarum, what is now Paignarum, he had this little house up the hill that he purchased as an investment in 1769, which his brother Benjamin also was the justice of the peace for those transactions. I mean, this guy was everywhere. So, things happened in that little house. Now we can only imagine, we can only speculate, but you know that phrase that we like to use now, in the room where it happened. Things happened at the Aiken house that's still standing. So before I bore all of you with more stories, I'll stop it here. I'm happy to take questions later.
So one question that I have had is, where were the town meetings held in 1760s, 70s, 80s?
Maybe a townhouse? I'm not sure. Does it say? Is it that
No, it's not specific.
The townhouse would have been on Hathaway Road, around where the New Bedford Country Club is?
Yes.
Where that is?
But for how long? Oh, that was the question. And we had when it was beginning, when they purchased the land and built the house, the townhouse.
One thing you have to keep in mind as you look at not only that period of revolution, but also the whole history of the area, is to keep in mind that the Dartmouth proprietors who owned the land were separate from the town government. The town of Dartmouth never owned land unless they bought it or somebody donated it. So I believe the original town meetings were held at mills or any other, at houses, private houses, or any other convenient meeting places. Generally not in Quaker meeting houses. In fact, the Quakers, I believe, prohibited that. But I believe that the first town meeting house was, as Richard said, at the end of, in the area of New Bedford Country Club, at the end of Slocum Road, where it hits Hathaway Road. And there was like a 1/4 acre that was donated by one of the proprietors in order to build a town house. And I think everybody knows in Dartmouth the progression of town meeting houses. What's now the Dartmouth DCTV, the community television structure was a town hall at one time. The old police station was a town hall at one time. The pool school is now the current one, and that's just in Dartmouth. If I may, I wanted to hit a couple of points which are disjointed. The first one is to just mention, in accordance with what Diane said, the DHAS, which is the Dartmouth Historical and Art Society, and it's nice to see so many directors here today, is researching Dartmouth houses which are still standing that were built by 1770. And I believe Westport Historical Society is doing the same for theirs. So we are certainly have an eye out for what those sites were that witnessed the American Revolution. And that'll be an ongoing thing. The second point I wanted to make to what Richard said is to point out that Plymouth Colony was absorbed into Massachusetts Bay Colony in 1691. And So that really was part of that early history of tugging to and fro, where Plymouth was sort of forgotten in the 1600s, but then the English king decided it was time to send Andros over to govern Boston, and at that time Massachusetts grabbed Plymouth, and we were all part of Plymouth Colony. So I wanted to point out that milestone. The third thing is to mention, as I actually have already said, that the old town meeting records are different from the proprietors' meeting records. The proprietors' meeting records were about the land management, whereas the town meeting records had to do with the appointment of the officials who took care of the roads and the assessments and the constables and all the other town offices. The next point is to mention that Bob Harding blessed us with a very complete index to go with those records of individuals. And Bob Harding also blessed us with a very comprehensive index in the 2 Quaker books that were printed by the Colonial Society of Massachusetts in collaboration with DHAS. I believe Westport Library has a copy of those 2 printed volumes. They're also available for, if you give a donation to us of DHAS of $100, you can acquire a set, or you can buy them on Amazon. The 2-volume set is $100. But anyone who's interested, has a particular ancestor or interest in a family, might find some interesting examples by looking at what the Quaker books say about this person, and also what the town meeting records say about their public appointments, or maybe their opinions expressed at town meeting. And the next point I wanted to make is that I think that as part of this whole project, we ought to go beyond the town meeting records, and we really ought to try to get a handle on the geographical features of the old Dartmouth, and include the maritime areas, the bay, which was filled with British ships often, and the Elizabeth Islands. And then to some extent, the traffic going to Nantucket. And in that context, there was the first maritime battle, which occurred off Fairhaven. There was what Richard mentioned about the Slocum family owning several of the Elizabeth Islands, Slocum family being very much Dartmouth residents, and putting cattle out there which may disappear into the hands of the British. There's also an area of Dartmouth called the Cow Yard. And the Cow Yard was frequently an area in which the British could come, send some boats ashore between Masham and Little River and pick up some nice cattle that are clandestinely either sold to them, probably sold to them by the Quakers. But I think we should not eliminate the role of the Elizabeth Islands in this history, because they really are tied to Dartmouth. I believe the Forbes family put out 2 books of the history of the islands. Unfortunately, they were a private publication. I have at least one, and I think probably a library can track down another one. But there were settlements out there on the Elizabeth Islands. As you probably know, the Elizabeth Islands, with the exception of Cuttyhank, are owned by the Forbes family. Most of them are conservation areas. They have a caretaker generally on North Shawn, and they have got Hadley Harbor, and where the Forbes family has their main mansions. They have some ties to Woods Hole, but there are some fascinating stories that involve this area. And also, Tarpaulin Cove was very, very active during this period. They not only had an inn on the island, they had a lighthouse, and that was approachable from Vineyard Sound. It was out of sight of, say, New Bedford, but that was heavily trafficked by all kinds of maritime trade. And there were all kinds of deals going on, and many of them were done by Dartmouth residents. So there's individual stories by Dartmouth residents who owned not only Cuttyhunk and Noshawn, but I think they owned Pask, which is where there was a settlement, and then Noshawn. So I think that should be really explored, and also the whole geographical setup of Dartmouth is so different from any other town, with our peaks and our ridges running north and south, and our wetlands in between. Look at the road, the current roads, which pretty well reflect what it was 300, 400 years ago, original Indian paths, but they didn't have cars or any other mode of transportation. They were on foot, and they were on wagons, and I think the whole road development of how these communities interacted with each other really ought to be explored. I know both Westport and Dartmouth and the DHAS are exploring putting together maps so you can see where people were living at the time in the early days, but also to think about how they were traveling from one place to another, which led to the separation of the three areas. Because before I go to that point, I just want to say Paul Cuffey had an important role in the American Revolution. As David Cole points out, he was operating from Russell's Mills Village. The Wainer family had a tannery there. You can see Tannery Lane still maintains its name. He was sending shallops out to Nantucket and to Tarpaulin and so on to resupply the Nantucket Quakers, who were considered to be outcast by both sides. But I think that whole industry relative to Dartmouth was really important, because always in Dartmouth, traveling by water is the easiest way. And you had routes to the south to Newport, but you had no Cape Cod Canal, and you couldn't get to Plymouth unless you went around Cape Cod, which really affects our history of why we were not part of Boston or Plymouth for so many years. And finally, the final point is that the federal census of 1790 is a very important piece, and it's very much available. And it will show a listing of people in the different communities. By 1790, the three communities had split. When I say three communities, New Bedford, Fairhaven, and Acushnet were one, current Dartmouth was another, and Westport was the other one. And if you look at them, and I think you'll see from the Old Town meeting records, there was always friction as to one part of town not wanting to send stuff to the other, schoolmasters or other people to other parts of the town. They wanted to have, they were equal in geographical size. They were equal before whaling took off in New Bedford after 1790. They were equal in population. They were equal in being agrarian. There were no cities. There were three distinct areas, and it was inevitable, in addition to the religious aspects, which Richard has explained so clearly, that physically, there was no way they were gonna stay together. So they separated, and then it took another century until the 1880s, when New Bedford, who became the civic proud city that it became, suddenly took an interest in its history and looked at the records, and they did two things. They, under a guy, James Congdon, who was commissioner, register of deeds, or some important city official, looked at the records and then did two important things. He transcribed transcribed the old town meeting records on the one hand, but he also had the land records going back to 1660s preserved to the extent that they could be, despite the fact that the proprietor's records had burned in 1725 and had tried to be reconstituted after that date. All of the records they could find, they did preserve, and it's a guy named James Congdon who did that, and he was a New Bedford city official. That's my spiel.
Thank you. That was Sally Aldrich. Okay. So I'm keeping an eye on the clock. Betty, do you want to say a few words, and then I'll probably talk a little bit more about the actual transcribing part, and some of you may need to leave, but we can continue the discussion as well. Betty.
Hi. Well, this basically set up what I'm interested in. I have been through the records, the Dartmouth town records, and have also been through the Quaker records. I was looking for the role of Paul Cuffey, John Cuffey, Walter, all the people that had within the Native community and also African community, African Americans. I guess basically we have found very little in the records about John and Paul Cuffey, but we do have two sites that show that they did play a role. And one of them was the issue of taxation without representation. They got into that, and that's mentioned. And then in the end, when the question of whether Westport should remain in Dartmouth, John Cuffey was in favor of that. Was one thing. So we will be celebrating, Sally, the role of Paul Cuffey in going over to Nantucket. We will have the Mayflower 2 shallop come, and we will do that whole trip. The other thing that hasn't been mentioned is that Westport Point was really the result of the war, because in 1776 you had the Corys and the Wilburs moving over to the point, and that began to develop. So it was also a witness and a result of the revolution. So those are the things we're interested in.
Okay, so I will talk a little bit about how this project moves forward. Here's some good news, bad news, or bad news, good news. So we're using it's a website called From the Page, and this allows transcribers to transcribe documents wherever they are. So you create a account, you create a username, give them your email, you create a password, and you're in. It's pretty straightforward. What I did a month ago, wanted to be prepared and understand the system. I uploaded the documents, and it's about, so the documents, the pages, it's 230 pages, left and right pages, but they were scanned, left and right was scanned as one document, so it's 130 pages as uploaded to the website. So it's not a lengthy project, and the pages are short. It's good. So I uploaded it, and almost immediately I started seeing, people are transcribing this. I don't know who they are, but these are people who love to do this kind of work. Not necessarily locals. Who knows who they are. So we are 100% transcribed by people that I do not know generally. So, but the good news is this is a much more interesting and easier phase of the project. We have to review what has been transcribed, and we as locals are much better at doing that. And I have found a way of controlling who can review this. So it's going to be us. It's not going to be unknown strangers doing it. So that's the good news, bad news. Now, I want to talk a little bit more. I have some instructions. So if you are interested in doing the review process, it's a matter of just reading the easy handwriting, cursive handwriting of Etta, comparing it to the transcription, which in most cases, I mean, I've looked at a few pages, it's really quite good. I have noticed some errors with names, and I think we are all more familiar with some of the people's names and place names. A few just minor errors, definitely some minor errors of just misreading a word. So I think all of you here are fully equipped to do the review process. Okay, so as I said, you navigate from the page, you create your own account, then there is an extra step. You have to let me know that you have created an account, because I have to then give you authority to review the pages. And so I need to know that you have stepped up and done that step. Okay.
Question, it's a verbatim
Yes,
transcription.
it
following
is.
Exactly.
Yeah, so you're not
Following.
you're not correcting oddly spelled personal names. You're following how the transcriber has spelled them, because we want that authenticity and accuracy. You're not trying to correct that sort of thing. You're not trying to add punctuation. Don't do that. Just keep it really simple, and it's pretty straightforward, I must say, compared to many other transcribing projects. So you're going to create your user account. You are going to let me know you've done it. I'm going to add you as a reviewer. You're going to receive an email from the page that will give you a link that takes you directly to the project. And the project is called, in our own words, Dartmouth Town Records, and Westport Historical Society's name is there. So it's going to take you directly to the project page. I do have a handout on that page. Don't worry, you don't have to remember this. In the top right corner of that page is a box that says pages that need review. You're going to click on that, and that's just going to give you a whole list of the pages that have yet to be reviewed, and that's all pages except one. I reviewed one of them. Okay. It might take, 10 minutes to review a page. Okay? When you've done it, you click complete, and it's done. Okay? And it just, it's pretty straightforward in some ways, but it is always a bit of a hurdle, whenever you're getting used to any kind of new interface. But some of you are going to enjoy it, and some of you may decide, no, this is not for me. Okay.
How do you control for the same person reviewing the same page?
Yeah, don't worry about that. It's pretty clear. Once it's reviewed, it's reviewed. You can't go back and
Okay,
review
so
it again.
I click on a page to be reviewed, nobody else is,
No.
okay.
No, I
great.
mean, that's right. I suppose there's the possibility that you're both reviewing a page at the same time, but don't worry about that, okay?
Yep.
So, my hope is to get this done by mid-January. I'd like some of you, if not all of you, to step up and say you're going to be a reviewer. I'm going to ask you to sign. You know, if I can get your name and email, that's how I can communicate the whole process better to you. It means that you do not have to go and find from the page. I can send you the link, and I will just make it easier. So I'm looking to get this done by mid-January, and I think that can be done really easily. It's not a huge amount of time for any of you, but we just need your eyes and, you know, a few minutes of your time, and some of you can really bring, you know, a lot of expertise. And then I would like to meet again in late winter to talk about what we discovered. Okay, so that's the plan. So I have some information to hand out. I don't have enough for everyone. I would like those of you who feel interested in doing the review process, or at least trying it, to sign up here. Okay. So, are there any questions at this point?
If a correction needs to be made.
Yes, you can go right into the text and just make that change.
The change and
Yes.
Is it are you going to be able to see that?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, okay, now I won't actually be able to see exactly what you've edited. I'm going to trust that you do as well as you can. I did download all of the text as it stands now, so if you do something like delete, you know, a page, it's okay.
But we're working online at the time.
Yes. Yes, I mean, it's a great interface in that it lets many people work on this. There's really no other way to do it that's as easy for me. Okay.
I created an account yesterday.
That's right, and I made you a reviewer. I've added you.
Yep.
Okay.
I created an account yesterday too,
Okay.
but you didn't make me a
Okay,
review.
so the thing is, you need to let me know. Send me an email, you signed up. Otherwise,
Well, that's fine, I'll do
Okay.
that, but I have another question. And maybe this is too complicated, because I tend to do that. But I've read whaling logbooks as a volunteer at the Whaling Museum. So when we read the logbooks, we didn't really transcribe them, we just read them. Then we had a page of notes that we could enter that would strike us as particularly interesting as we read the logbook. So this was all,
there is a place to put notes. You'll see it on the page itself. So anything that you find interesting, just put it in there, and that all gets somehow shared. I certainly see them, and so we can go through them when we meet again. Just anything that you question or are unsure of or curious.
cool stuff.
Yes, so definitely do that. Any other questions at this point? I'm sure you may have, when you start working, you may have questions, but I do hope that you'll give it a try. I'm going to send this round, and you can always call me or email me at the Historical Society. I hope you really enjoy it. Oh, one more question?
I haven't worked on this yet, but I did work from the page at the Whaling Museum on the logbooks that they were doing. I went through the process of learning everything from scratch because I'd never done anything like that before. It was very straightforward, and I did also learn in the process because there's sort of a structure there of transcribers and reviewers, and then watchers of the reviewers also. I think that if a mistake is made, front the page works well to basically unwind anything.
Yeah.
So that was sort of a comfort in case you screw up, either as a transcriber or as a reviewer. You have the power to basically fix any problem, so
Yes.
not to worry.
Yeah. It's a really good interface. I'm really pleased with it, and it lets us. We can index things. There's a lot of more sophisticated things that we can do, but I'm just interested in getting the project transcribed and an accurate transcription. Okay. Thank you. You're welcome to talk more amongst yourselves. Please do sign up if you want to try being a reviewer, and stay in touch with the project. We'll meet again in the winter.